It's now time for What's Up Asheville, sponsored by the City of Asheville, with the host, Mr. Sam Parada, and here he is.
Good afternoon, Asheville, and welcome to What's Up Asheville at WRES Radio 100.7 FM, a radio show discussing projects and initiatives of the City of Asheville. As you know, I'm Sam Parada, Communication and Public Engagement Specialist, and this week I was lucky enough to get Alex Cole, the Urban Planner and Manager for the city's Historic Preservation Program, to join me. And by saying that I'm lucky, I mean that she's so busy all the time, so it's a pleasure to have you here, Alex.
Thank you, Sam. Happy to be here.
And I always like to start the show by having my guests tell me what they do for the city and, walk me through your day-to-day life. I know you're very busy with all the work that you do, so I'm sure you have plenty to say.
Sure. So as Sam mentioned, I manage the city's Historic Preservation Program, which is housed within the Planning and Urban Design Department. And I'm also the staff liaison to the Historic Resources Commission of Asheville and Buncombe County. So we have a lot of work that falls under our program. We do everything from design review or development review within our local historic districts. We also have a very robust local historic landmark program, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but we have now 50 landmarks in Buncombe County. Our program does cover both the city and county. And we also work really closely with other regional and state partners who do preservation work and work in an advisory capacity with those organizations. And probably what we'll spend the most time talking about today as far as recent projects we've been working on are architectural survey projects, which is basically the identification, inventorying of historic resources that we continually update, work on throughout the city and county as the years go by. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell all the things that fall under our program.
And how do you do this? I guess once you take a project in and you do the survey for it, how does that take place? How does it look like?
Yeah, sure. So oftentimes these are grant funded projects. Our programmatic budget is a little bit limited. Because I work in the planning department, we have a lot of different priorities for a very small department. So we are always trying to make the best of the resources that we have, and we do have multiple grant options that we apply for every now and then to help fund these the survey work or other extra projects that we might want to tackle. So we go through the grant application process usually, and then we go through a competitive selection process to hire a consultant or outside agency to help us do the actual work in the field. So my role is really more like project management.
Oh, okay.
So once the ball gets rolling. So working with the community to do engagement and all those fun things that we do whenever we have big projects going on.
Mm-hmm. And so the surveyors then go out, they do their work, and you compile it, basically? Yeah.
So usually a survey project will result in raw data that's sort of like identifying built features. So they might go in a neighborhood house to house and describe each individual resource, as we call them, or building or structure from an architectural and historical standpoint. And then that's all uploaded into our state's Historic Preservation Office database, so we can use it from a GIS standpoint. And then there's also a draft survey report that comes out of it. And the survey report has a historic narrative and talks about the evolution of a particular neighborhood or area.
That's pretty cool. And so what does it mean for something to be historically preserved? What do you call it?
Yeah, so in the United States, we call it historic preservation. In other countries, they call it conservation. It means that we are basically we're identifying what historically is important to our community. And in our country, the metric is 50 years or older is what we consider to be historic. although it can be younger buildings or places sometimes. So it could also be a landscape or archaeological resource. So it covers this kind of broad swath of historic and cultural things that we identify as being valuable to our city or organization or place or
even small communities.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you've been knee deep in some projects lately. Do you want to tell us about some of those?
Sure. So probably one of the biggest ones that we've worked on, we started in 2018. We really, from looking at the GIS data that we have available, we could see where, since survey work in our country started back in like 1970s, most typically for most communities. And so we could look at the GIS data and see where there were holes in our community where we hadn't focused survey work. And you could see particularly that we hadn't focused our work on neighborhoods of color. And so we really felt like it was important to shift our programmatic focus to be more from an equity standpoint. We really wanted to try to identify resources that might be historically important to our BIPOC communities. We've started our work specifically on our historically Black neighborhoods. So we started that project in 2018. That was kind of a first phase, if you will. We didn't have a very big project budget, so we really were kind of doing this in phases. So we were able to identify or inventory, if you will, 75 resources that were kind of scattered throughout the city. So we just finally were able to publish the final draft survey report, which is, I would highly encourage anyone who's interested to read it. It's on the city's website. If you go to the Planning and Urban Design Department's website specifically, it's got an amazing historical narrative that really, I think, at least for me, was highly educational and meaningful to understand our African American community better from a historic perspective. So glad to have that work under.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you did it. I mean, historically, so many communities have been left in the shadows for so long, and it's a really nice thing that you have done here to bring that back out to light and to publish it. And anyone can read it, correct? There's not a fee behind it.
No, it's available to the public. Whoever wants to use it, it can, I think, help inform other projects within the community. And so I'm just really, happy to have been a very small part of this work. I moved to Asheville 20 years ago, and I had no idea first of all, when I moved here, I had no idea I'd work in the field that I do. But now that I do, I am happy to be able to focus our program in areas that feel very meaningful to partner with the community on. So,
Can you tell us a little bit more about the findings of this recent survey?
Sure. So that survey was, like I said, a first phase where we're really gonna, it's kind of our jumping off point, right? So we're taking that information and looking at where we want to go next as far as our next phase of survey, which will probably be kind of going neighborhood by neighborhood and trying to find funding for those, future phases. It happened sort of organically following up on that project being nearly completed, that we ended up partnering with the Burton Street Community Association about a year and a half or so ago to work on their survey project. They are an environmental justice community, and that is a designation that comes out of environmental review whenever there's big federal projects, especially highway projects involved. So obviously they're going to be re-impacted or impacted again by the I-240-26 corridor project.
Right.
And so as part of that, the NCDOT worked with them to create a mitigation plan. And one of the things that came out of the mitigation plan was to create a pattern book, which is sort of it's basically a way to communicate to potential developers and others in the community what the historic character is of a neighborhood.
Okay. To try to keep that character.
Yeah, exactly. So we, as a first phase to doing the pattern book for them, my department has, we contracted with SNME, which is a regional consulting firm, to update their survey, their architectural survey. They've had multiple architectural surveys over the years in that neighborhood, so we really needed to update it with specific information about the building features themselves, so that we know how to draft the pattern book, which will be a digital tool. So we're excited to work on that. It's kind of like a pilot thing. We've never done a pattern book before.
Okay.
And usually they're paper documents or even a virtual, like a digital flip book of sorts.
Right.
But we're going to build ours to be in the format like, if you're not familiar with Esri story maps,
I really am not.
Google them. There are story maps for everything. I mean, all topics, and it's basically it's a GIS based platform, but you can add photos and text, all different kinds of content, and so it's a really great interactive way to communicate in a digital format.
So GIS is the mapping system where you can like put a pin in a location and you can find more information about it.
Exactly. It's geographic information system, and we use it a lot in planning. So thank you for asking me to clarify how we use that as a tool. It's usually for mapping and looking at different layers of data so that we can kind of better approach the projects that we work on. The Esri Story Map platform has trended a little bit beyond just, it's like the map, I would say, is not always the most dominant feature when you go onto a story map of any given topic, because there's all different ways you can format the information and make it really cool and visually interesting and user friendly.
So I can find the landmark and learn about the history of it and, just how it's changed over time.
Yeah, definitely. The pattern book will be a tool that will try to help share with developers so that, like, as you mentioned, that whatever future development occurs there is more contextual or sensitive to the existing historic fabric in that neighborhood.
More respectful.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, the one thing, happens all the time recently. I imagine just these neighborhoods keep being pushed back or change, and then the history behind them is gone, which is a shame. But no, hopefully this work you've been putting in will help avoid all of that in the near future. So that's a really positive thing.
Yeah, I hope so. There's no perfect tool, but I think we're trying to think creatively from a historic preservation perspective to make sure that we're serving our community as best as we can, rather than, I think, to me personally, looking at historic preservation and kind of the national framework that we work under, I see some of the trends shifting towards not being quite as rigid and exclusive of communities of color as it has been historically, because I think anyone who works in the preservation field could tell you that some of the rules and regulations around historic designations in particular are pretty limiting.
Yeah.
There's a integrity standard that we talk about that's, I won't get in the weeds on with you today, but it basically excludes a lot of the neighborhoods that have been impacted by projects like urban renewal in the past, because they might have, their historic fabric, if you will, might have been disrupted by those projects, and Burton Street's a great example of that. So,
but you managed to get the Burton Street architectural survey on its way.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a great project to work on, and it was part of their, I should go back and say, and maybe I didn't say this, but they're part of the mitigation that they worked on with NCDOT was this neighborhood plan, and the pattern book was identified as a strategy in their neighborhood plan, and so we've been working closely with them to not just do the pattern book, but other things that are important to the neighborhood as far as mitigating gentrification and et cetera, and other important things.
Right.
And I should also say that that project was also funded by a donation from the community association, with a small match from our departmental budget. So I think that's important to know that we're super grateful that they were willing to partner with us.
Very important. Yeah, I mean, this is something that the community clearly wants.
Yeah.
And it's been done. It's been a long time coming. While we're on the topic, I would love to hear your experience with the recently approved Walton Street local landmark designation.
Yeah, so that's a great example of why survey work is important in the work that we do, because it was identified, the Walton Street Park and Pool were identified as properties that were good candidates for historic designation. So there's kind of two main types of historic designation. Probably the one that's most familiar to people is the National Register of Historic Places, and that is a program that's administered by the State Historic Preservation Office under the guidance of the National Park Service. And it's a primarily honorific designation type. And then at the local level, as I mentioned early on in our conversation, is local historic landmark designation, which functions more like a zoning tool, where if a property is designated, then it has certain protections in place.
Okay.
And so any changes like to the park and pool, since Walton Street was recently designated,
they have to take that into account before making any big changes.
Exactly. So that's a lot of what the Historic Resources Commission does in their work is, parks might put together a plan for the improved amenities in the park, and then they go to the Historic Resources Commission and they go through this, what we call design review process, to make sure that the historic features are treated sensitively and that whatever work happans there.
Right. And this is an extra aid for the community members who feel strongly about these historical landmarks to say, hey, take another look.
Yeah.
Instead of just destroying it or changing it in a way that would make it just completely different from what it used to be.
Exactly, and that process is a public hearing process too. So whenever a project is going through design review like that, then there's opportunity for the public to weigh in, and so that's another benefit. And I should also highlight that Walton Street happened to be the 50th local landmark in Buckingham.
50th.
Yeah, so
wow.
I was a happy coincidence, but we're really pleased that it worked out that way. So.
Great number.
Yeah.
And you mentioned before that there's only 3 African American landmarks as of now in Asheville.
Yes. Well, sorry, Walton Street would make the 4th.
The 4th. Okay.
Yeah. So the YMI building, which I would say most of us who live here in Asheville are familiar with. Stevens Lee Gymnasium, and the South Asheville Cemetery. Those are 3 of our already designated landmarks before Walton Street that are specifically historically important to the African American community here in Asheville and Buncombe County. And I would encourage you, if you've never visited South Asheville Cemetery, it's a pretty incredible place. It's where, if you don't know this, that where the Smith McDowell house, their enslaved people were interred in this burial ground that eventually became a more formalized cemetery. And it's through the hard work of several individuals that place was preserved over time, because it kind of over time had gotten overgrown and stuff. And so there's actually a cemetery association that does a lot of really amazing work to care for it.
Yeah, I had no idea.
it's hidden. It's within the Kenilworth neighborhood, so
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't know it's there.
Well, I think I'm just gonna have to go to your department website and just look at all the different landmarks. Have a little scavenger hunt with all the different landmarks in the city.
That would be fun. Maybe you can help me set that up. But yes, we do actually have a story map of our landmarks. So if you're interested in knowing more, you can go on our website and check that out. It's got photos, some current, some historic, of all the different landmarks in the county. So it's pretty cool to check out.
Yeah. And going back to the pool, do you think the reaction, what do you think the reaction was to the landmark, being designated as a historical landmark?
It seemed overwhelmingly positive to me. the people that I talked with in the community or shared their feelings with me have very deep emotional family ties to that space, and that's not something that we get to know every time a landmark designation comes through. It's oftentimes very much focused on the actual,
just the history,
the building, or or the architecture. So in this case, it was really neat to hear some personal stories about how super important of a place it is. And obviously there have been many resources in our historically African American community that were lost to urban renewal. We had multiple urban renewals projects here that where there were many resources that were lost. So it's definitely one of the institutional kind of heart of a place that we're really glad to help preserve, being that that's what the community wanted.
And it's also a very good tool for people who are looking to either working or renewing or even fixing without the historical knowledge and the impact it has on the community, and just because they don't know. But hopefully, these landmark designations will help, people make better decisions. And it's not out of bad will. Clearly, it's just ignorance on, the history of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of why we embarked on the journey that we did back in 2018, and to really understand, the historic character of our community from a more inclusive perspective, because really we hadn't done that before. And so we want to make sure that our historic narrative and the legacy we carry forward includes everyone in the community. And I, it's every time we do a new project, I get to learn what is important to the community.
I was going to ask you, how much, since moving to Asheville 20 years ago, how much has your scope of the history of it changed?
Vastly. I actually entered the field of preservation with quite a different kind of agenda in my mind. It was more focused heavily on downtown. And over the years, I've been with the city for about 8 years now. Over the years of doing this work, my kind of what is meaningful to me to be a part of has expanded in a lot of different ways, and so I try to take that into my day-to-day work.
Yeah.
So
I bet it also makes you more appreciative of where you live.
For sure, we have an incredibly vibrant community here. And I think if I had to say one thing about historic preservation that I think is probably a little bit of a misperception, is that historic preservation means that something stays the same forever or is static. It really, to me, is a dynamic field. It's a way that we highlight our common stories.
Yeah.
And what connects us to not only our place where we live and our community, but to each other. And that's the important part of why I do what I do, to me.
And it sounds like you really love it and the impact that it does.
I do. And some days my job is more stressful than others and busy, but there are these moments where I can take a step back and look at the work we've been doing and feel really proud. So.
Yeah, I mean, you've been working on this for 4 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time to put into a project, and just finally seeing it take shape and solidify itself into something that people can read. It must feel great.
It does. It's a small thing in the grand big picture of what the city is doing, one small little cog, if you will, but I it's my area of expertise, and I'm happy to do my part for the community that I've lived in and loved for such a long time. So
I love it. So how does one go to begin a historical survey project? Is that something that I can come to you and say, hey, I want to learn more about this thing because I think it has a historical value? Or do you go through a more rigid process of choosing?
It kind of depends on what, like if you called me and said, Alex, I'm interested in knowing about this historic farm in Fairview.
Right.
That either you own or someone else's own, then we could kind of advise you on how to go about researching that. Typically with a project that we undertake, we're kind of methodical about like how we're prioritizing our work, because if we put a project like the one we started in 2018 on our work plan, it obviously takes a lot of resources to get those across the finish line. So we try to be pretty strategic about how we lay those out, and I would say the grant monies that are available are probably every 2 to 3 years that we're able to work on something like that. So
Okay. But so in 2018, when you wanted to make a more equitable approach to historical designations, how did you specifically found the Walton Street pool? How did that fall in your lap? Is what I'm asking.
Okay, I see. So the consultant we hired actually drafted the report, and one of the sections in the report was what resources that you surveyed as part of this project are good candidates for either National Register designation, local landmark designation, or both.
Okay.
And so there were 3 that came out of that report, one being Walton Street Park, and the other 2 were Rabbit's Motel on Ashland, Cox. I get those 2 streets mixed up all the time, but it's a really amazing property, and then also the Wilson Building on Eagle Street.
And are these historical surveys to come? Is that what's next in your plate?
I think so. We are working on another grant-funded project, which is sort of it's a organizational thing where we're working on hosting a regional training for other people in Western North Carolina that do the kind of work that I do.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the big thing that I've got going on right at this moment. But beyond that, I think we're looking at, just what do we want to do in our next fiscal year as far as survey work, and aligning that with the grant application deadlines that are out there. So
yeah. Are you the only historical preservation person for this city, or?
Yes, pretty much. I mean, since I'm the program manager and I have a master's degree in historic preservation, it's really my kind of wheelhouse and area of expertise. We do have one other staff member that works in the planning department who's amazing and does a lot of support work for the Historic Resources Commission and some other design review, and he's awesome. So we're lucky to have him. But we're a very small staff. I think when we're fully staffed, there's only like 14 of us, and if you saw our work plan, it would probably scare you.
Oh, I work with your department,
right.
So I know. I know.
Yeah.
That's really cool, though. I mean, it's just the fact that, you're such a small team, but you still put like 100% effort into it every single day.
I think we're all really passionate in my department about what we do.
I think so too.
And I'm really fortunate to work with other professionals that, we really take a collaborative approach, and we try to look at things holistically, and where we can help support each other, we try to do that. So it's a great environment to work in.
I'm very happy to have joined the city during this more, equitable approach to how things are being done. It really puts into perspective, different places that I've been in my life and how much of an effort Asheville is actually putting into it. It's such a positive feeling. And I know there's a lot of work to do, but, we're trying.
Right. I feel like we've taken a lot of steps to position ourselves to keep improving and keep improving on what we do. Because it definitely, to speak to my own ignorance, I wasn't thinking through an equity lens when I first started my work with the city. And it was through the hard work of others that I was able to educate myself even to some degree to understand that
absolutely
we really need to start looking at the entire community from a, not, I wouldn't say planning, that I wouldn't say we weren't before, but from the preservation perspective specifically.
Yeah.
So
well, thank you so much for coming. Sadly, we're out of time, and that usually happens. We have so much more to talk about, but only so much you can fit in half hour. But before we go, just again, thank you, Alex, and to anyone listening, we are here for you, the city. We're doing our best to meet everyone's needs and wants, and tell us how we're doing, tell us what you want to see done. We'll be happy to listen to you, and just talk to us, tell us we're doing a good job, hold us accountable if we're not. And we'll be back next time to talk about more projects. I think the fire department will be here, so that should be an interesting conversation. But until then, stay tuned, and we'll be back for another episode of WRES in WRES 100.7 FM. See you next time, Asheville.
You've been listening to What's Up Asheville, sponsored by the City of Asheville in collaboration with WRES 100.7 FM. This program will re-air every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12:30. Thank you for listening.